So here we're applying the color for our sea turtle. We're melting in those chips the frit, our little bits of glass that have been pre-colored with different metals. In the case of sea turtle, we're using lots of greens and browns and some white, so mainly iron, nickel, and tin, respectively. It's important that we're always turning the pipe when we're making our pieces. That glass is a viscous liquid, and if you stop turning, it's going to flow off the end of the pipe. You can actually see us rolling through the chips of glass now. And they stick to the surface, but they don't actually melt. For that, we have to go back into the furnace and let that heat soak into the glass and melt those chips. It's about 2,000 degrees inside the furnace, and it makes pretty short work of melting those chips. You have Megan kind of cleaning up the color. So we'll be rolling the glass on that metal table to shape it. We don't want to contaminate that with any more chips of glass. There you can see that color's all melted in, and as soon as I touch the glass to the steel table, it changes color. You can see the heat dissipating as that steel sucks away the heat. Putting a puff of air into the pipe and trapping that air in there with my thumb. It's called the puff and cap, and you can see that bubble expand as that air pushes its way into the soft glass. We're letting it cool down a little bit. I'll shape it up with some paper. This will not only shape it, but help cool it down. We need more glass in this to make the size sea turtle we want to make today. It's important that we set everything up well. I'm just watching for the color to change, watching for that movement to slow down before I get back up and wind on more glass on top of this. We're going to go back into the furnace now and wind on that second gather of glass. We're letting the excess glass drip back into the furnace. We don't want too much. When I come out, we've got a fresh 2,000 degree gather. And it's fairly well distributed around that core, but we're going to grab a shaping block and just kind of clean up the form a little bit, smoothing it out. There was a little bit of corkscrewing in the glass when we gathered. So we're just cleaning that up, rounding it off. That block is made out of cherry wood, and those short, dense grains help it burn evenly as we use it, so it doesn't wear out too quickly. And finish the shaping up with the paper. The paper is nice because it'll be any shape your hand wants it to be. Those blocks are very static. They don't change shape. They're great for shaping, but you need one for every size and form you need. I added a blow hose to the pipe now. This is going to let me work with tools and shape the glass at the same time. Megan and I have never made a sea turtle together, so we're kind of discussing what's going to be happening. Kind of threw her to the wolves on this one. She's just figuring out as she goes. So we're shaping up the tip here. We're going to puff this out. I've asked Megan to put a paddle up on the bench. We're going to use that to flatten this. But first, we're going to have to crackle the surface. We're going to shatter it in a bucket of water. Cutting in a jack line right there. That is a constriction in the glass that's going to help me remove this piece from the blowpipe a little later in the process. We're going to get this good and hot. Sometimes when I make these turtles, I flatten them before I crackle them, and sometimes I crackle them before I flatten them. In this case, we're going to flatten it first. Now, every time I push that on the paddle, I'm puffing into it to prevent it from collapsing. We really don't want the two sides of that bubble to touch back into each other. stretching out what will be the head area of that turtle, tightening up that jack line, now we're going to paddle this one more time. I'm actually going to use two paddles, the wet one and a dry one, and we're going to just press this glass between them and really get that nice and flat and wide. And I keep flipping it because we need to keep it centered. If I just keep paddling the same side, it's going to push the bubble off center. So now I'm having Megan clear out the bucket so we can crackle the surface here. In order to do that, we need to get it really hot. Sometimes you get tangled up on your hose. It happened here. Getting the surface of this glass really hot. I'm going to dunk it into a bucket of water. This is going to shatter the surface, but the core of the glass is still hot enough that it's going to bind everything together. And we get a really neat mottled pattern on the surface. We'll do this at least once more. Now in the background you can see some pipes in some fire back there. That piece of equipment is pretty important. It preheats all of our pipes. Here we go with our second quench. When Megan starts bringing me the bits for this turtle, it's very important those pipes are preheated or the glass doesn't stick to them. Got a good crackle in the surface now. It's time to start shaping and torching the body of this. We'll crimp the sides using a pair of flat mashers now. Just give it the look that those turtle shells tend to have on their edges. We're raised up in the middle, kind of flattened on the outside. Right now the glass is probably about 1500 degrees. It is hot enough to mold, but it's very stiff and it's fighting me. You can really see that crackle pattern well. Those greens and browns. Really starting to show through. When you can start seeing the colors that well, you know the temperature is getting down. Now, I'm going to take a torch, I'm going to melt in some spots that we're going to compress and use as guides to put the fins on. But before we do that, once we get to that step, there's no turning back. So before we do that, we're just going to stop and take a look and make sure it's where we want it to be. Once we move on from this step, there's no going back. I'm using the tag there just to clean up the lines a little bit. Megan and I agree that it's time to put on those bits. So I'm using a torch right now to spot heat where the fins are going to go. We're going to get those hot and press them in a little bit. Give me little guides to set the fins in place. That's just an oxypropane torch. They come in much larger sizes. That's a fairly small one. You notice even now that the glass is not moving as much, I still have to turn the pipe. All right. I'm going to take a flash of heat, and then Megan's going to bring the first set of fins. In this studio, we use our furnace as the reheating chamber. And most studios have 2 different chambers for that. It makes working in such a tight space a little tricky, but Megan and I have worked together for several years. So moving around the shop isn't as difficult as it could be. If that glass gets too cold while we're working on it, it does risk breaking. It could crack and shatter from cooling too quickly. That's why we're always reheating the glass. Even though I don't want to change the shape of the body of the turtle anymore, every once in a while I have to get up and heat the thing up. So we'll take our diamond shears here. We'll fuse that glass together. Cut, and I've left enough that I can get both fins out of that same bit. There's a little bit of a size difference there, and we'll go back and adjust that. But first, let's crimp those flat. Take a reheat. Get that body warmed back up, and then we'll start stretching those fins. Now it's time for Megan to start those front fins. I'm going to open the door up a little bit to make sure I can fit back in. Got to be careful not to get this turtle too big, otherwise I won't be able to get it back in the furnace to reheat it. Megan is letting this glass cool down. She needs more material than she can get in one gather. And you can get as much glass as you want on a pipe if you let it cool off and gather over it. And you can repeat that as many times as you need to until you have enough material. In the case of one of these fins, we really only need 2 gathers worth of glass. And she's air marvering that glass right now. That's just letting gravity and the air shape it before she shapes it on the table, smoothing it into a nice cylinder. She's not only controlling the shape here, she's really controlling the heat. She wants to cool that core down a little bit and then reheat the surface. That way, when I take the bit, it's not flopping all over the place. It's stiff enough not to move around too much, but soft enough to cut. All right. Shaping that up again. I was making some adjustments to the fins. I just wasn't quite happy with the way they were sitting, so I gave Megan some time to reheat while I made some more adjustments. All right, now we're going to put on the front fins, just like we did the back fins. We'll take what we want and stick the other side. And we'll flatten those with that crimp. And again, reheat the body. And just like on the back fins, we're going to take a little bit of time to get those front fins to match. Use that torch again to spot heat. This time they were much closer in size. So we'll just use the tweezers to pull them in place. All right. So we've got our fins done there. And now it's time to start working on that head. So while I'm reheating this piece, Megan is gathering up the glass for the neck and head of our sea turtle. And this is usually done in two parts. We'll take the neck and the top of the head in one bit, and then we'll attach another small piece of glass to act as the lower jaw. Just like before, she's letting that cool in the air before she shapes it up. You can hear her there asking what shape I want this in. Again, we've never done these together before. This is our first sea turtle together. So she sort of just has to use her experience to anticipate what I might need if I don't tell her in advance. She's going to bring that glass over. We'll drop it right from above, right into place. Cut through it. Now I'll use the diamond shears to stretch out the neck and create a head. And we'll use the flat mashers just to kind of flatten that head. Sea turtles tend to have broad, flat heads. Now I'm sending Megan to gather up that last little bit of glass to be the underside of this turtle's jaw. She's bringing it fresh right out of the furnace. I want it really good and hot. But we hesitated just a little bit, and it was enough, just a second too long, that I had to have her shape that glass up just a little bit. Using that tag to sculpt that into place. And then my tweezers just to clean that up a little bit. All right, we've got that head shaped up. Now we need to remove the turtle from the pipe and attach a tail. We're going to tighten up that jack line though. Where it's attached to the pipe is where we're going to add the tail. So we need to really tighten that line up because it's a pretty large hole back there right now. So I'll use the torch to melt that line, and I'll use the jacks and the diamond shears to just squeeze it in a little bit and make it tighter. It's really important you get this step just right, because once you remove it from the blowpipe, it's out of the heat. There's no chance to reheat it, so it could get too cold and crack while you're attaching the tail. So we're really making sure we get this good and hot so I can squeeze down first with the jacks. You see, Megan took a lot of my tools away there. She's actually moving them to the knockoff table so that when we transfer this off, I'll have the tools needed so that I can shape and sculpt that tail when it goes on. So I'm using straight shears to score and chill it, a little tap, and he pops right off. Megan's warming up the gloves because as soon as I get this tail on, she is going to have to pick up this turtle and put him away. And she's got to be very careful not to touch the fins. They're the thinnest part of the turtle. See me sculpting up that tail a little bit. Stripping it and cutting it again. And then melting away the sharp edge. I don't want anyone to cut themselves on the tail of a sea turtle, so we melt away the sharpness that's left behind by that cut. And it goes into a 925 degree oven to cool down. That turtle's going to sit in that oven for the rest of the working day, which will be at this point about 9 more hours. And then at the end of that 9 hours, it starts a 14-hour cooling cycle. At the end of that cycle, he'll be down to room temperature and safe and stable. If it's not cooled that way, that glass, which is all different thicknesses and different temperatures, will cool and shrink at different rates, and eventually would rip itself apart as it cooled down. And thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed our demonstration. I'm just thankful to be able to do what I do in front of people. It's a lot of fun to make work in front of people, rather than just in a shop away from everybody.